again. This is my second part of my overview of the Bible, and this is my overview of the New Testament. Like I said earlier, the New Testament is the skinnier section at the end of the Bible that is specifically about Jesus and about the early Christians. And like I said, Jesus himself was a Jew, and the earliest Christians, a lot of them were Jews. And so in the New Testament you get Jesus himself and a lot of the early Christians referring to Old Testament passages and quoting them, which is why we keep them bound together. And Christians believe that if you read the Old Testament, you see passages referring to Jesus coming in the future and who he'd be and what he'd do. So that's why we see all these books as one big whole. The New Testament is I'm going to show you the contents page now. Where are we? Help if I go through the right page. Here we are. The first 4 books are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they are all biographies of Jesus. Biographies of Jesus' life. So they've got the stories of Jesus and the sayings of Jesus in them. They're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because they're the people attributed to writing them. So they're not actually about people called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're about Jesus, but that's the names they've been given. So if you want to read directly the stories of Jesus and his teachings, then they'll be in those 4 books. Show you this again. The next book after John is Acts of the Apostles, and that's the sequel to the biographies of Jesus. It's the story of what happened next after Jesus died and rose again and went back to heaven, and it tells the story of how the earliest of Jesus' followers continued what Jesus started when he was on earth, continued his ministry. So it's got, if you read the Gospels and then you read Acts, you watch these people that used to be fishermen, some of them used to be fishermen, and you watch them turning into these really courageous public speakers who heal people because Jesus put his own power in them to carry out his work. It's a very exciting book to read, and also within that book you've got the famous story of a man who was originally called Saul, who had his name changed to Paul, and he used to try and get Christians killed until he encountered Jesus in person out of the blue, and he then became a Christian himself and devoted the rest of his life to trying to teach and proclaim Christianity, particularly to the people that weren't Jews, because he realised that God's plan was not just for the Jews, but was for something far bigger that was about the whole world. After Acts, most of the rest of the New Testament, most of the rest of the New Testament, from Romans right the way through to Jude, they're all letters that were written to the earliest congregations, a lot of them by Paul, some of them by other people such as Peter and John, who are some of these earliest followers as well. And as the news of Christianity, it wouldn't have been called that at the time, but as the news of Christianity spread, congregations, groups of Christians grew up in different towns, so it was important that they learnt proper teaching and that they were guided and nurtured into proper Christianity without being led astray or getting the wrong idea of what Christianity was about. So some of these letters are called things like Romans and Corinthians because they're addressed to the group of Christians in Rome or in Corinth. And some of these letters are called, say, Timothy because they're to somebody called Timothy, or called things like 1 John, 2 John, 3 John because they're letters that John's believed to have written to people. So yeah, most of these are, it's important to remember that these were letters written at a specific time to specific groups of people, usually addressing particular problems or issues that they were facing. And they're useful for us to read today because it does help us check that we've got, because they're about making sure that your Christian beliefs and the way you're living are as they should be. They're helpful for us to refer to. And people tend to concentrate more on reading the letters if they're thinking about how to live out the Christian life. I hope that makes sense. The last book of the Bible, which you also have probably heard of, is Revelation. And I think it's probably famous for being, it's about the end times, and it's probably a bit famous for being about fire and brimstone and people trying to use it to scaremonger people. It's actually got some really hopeful and beautiful passages in it about Jesus reassuring people that ultimately God will finally rule the whole world, and it will come back to being ruled completely by love and by justice. And him assuring his people that he will come back soon and take his place as the rightful ruler of the world and make everything in the world brought back together, brought back to God even, and right again. So it's not all doom and gloom and fire, and it's actually quite a beautiful and exciting book. So yeah, if you're thinking of looking into the Bible, if you're interested in Christianity for now, I'd just look at the New Testament, and I'll do some other videos on how you might go about starting to read it, because it might be quite daunting to try and just read it from front to back. But I'll do some other videos on ways into it and ways of reading it bit by bit that might be quite helpful. So yeah, I hope this video has been helpful.